The hospital board fired Alara Quinn at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and they did it with the kind of efficiency that only cowards who've rehearsed their cruelty can manage. 3 of them sat on the other side of a long mahogany table doctor. Harlan Pruitt, the chief of medicine, flanked by 2 administrators, whose names Alara had never bothered to learn because they had never once set foot on her floor. Pruitt had a folder open in front of him. He didn't look at her when he spoke. He looked at the folder, like the words were easier to say when they were addressed to paper. Your employment with St. Jude's Medical Center is terminated, effective immediately, for repeated violations of patient triage protocol and insubordination in a critical care setting. He closed the folder. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Alara sat perfectly still. Patient she had broken protocol to save a 62-year-old man named Gerald Watts, who had coded twice in the ER waiting room, while the triage charge nurse insisted his paperwork wasn't processed, was currently alive in the cardiac ICU. She had pushed past the charge nurse, started compressions in the hallway, and screamed for the crash cart before anyone could stop her. Gerald Watts was alive because she had refused to wait. Pruitt's folder was full of that refusal, documented and reframed as misconduct. She said Gerald Watts would be dead. Pruitt finally looked up. That's not the point. That's exactly the point. One of the administrators cleared his throat. Miss Quinn, Nurse Quinn. A pause. The administrator glanced at Pruitt. Pruitt looked back at his folder. The decision has been made, Pruitt said. You can contest it through the appropriate HR channels within 14 business days. She walked out without the escort. She knew where her locker was. She'd been walking these hallways for 7 years. Now subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And stay until the very end, because what happens to Alara Quinn in the next 2 hours will change the way you think about courage, loyalty, and exactly what kind of person you become when the world has taken everything from you. The rain was the kind that didn't care about you. It came straight down, no drama, no wind, just cold and heavy and relentless, soaking through Alara's jacket inside of Zyson's. She had a plastic bag from the supply closet tied at the top, containing her stethoscope, a framed photo of her mother, a half-eaten granola bar, and the small succulent she'd kept on the windowsill of the break room for 3 years. The bag was already tearing at one of the handles. She was 6 blocks from the hospital, walking because her car had a busted alternator, and she'd been putting off the repair for 2 weeks, telling herself she'd handle it after her next paycheck. There wasn't going to be a next paycheck. Her phone had 41% battery. She'd already done the math in her head 3 times, the way she did when she was scared. Rent was 4 days away. Her checking account held $238, and her savings, what was left of it, after her mother's funeral expenses 18 months ago, would cover maybe 6 weeks if she ate carefully and turned the heat down. Kept walking. The street she was on wasn't a street most people chose. It ran parallel to a stretch of defunct warehouses along the river, heavy industrial. Mostly dark, the kind of block that the city had rezoned 3 times, ever actually developing. Cut through it because it shaved 4 minutes off her walk home, and she was soaked, and she was tired, and she was trying very hard not to think about the way Pruitt had looked at his folder instead of her face. She heard them before she saw them. Engines, low, controlled, not the rumble of trucks, but something tighter, expensive. Multiple vehicles moving in coordinated silence, which was somehow worse than noise. 4 matte black SUVs came around both ends of the block at the same time, headlights cutting through the rain, and they stopped in a formation that left no gap. A 5th vehicle larger, a Suburban, pulled directly across the sidewalk ahead of her, blocking her path completely. Alara stopped walking. Her first instinct was practical. She'd grown up in this city. She knew what a targeted stop looked like, and this one was professional. These weren't kids. The vehicles were too clean, too coordinated, and the men who stepped out of them moved with the specific kind of economy that meant they'd done this before, and it had gone badly for the other person. 6 men. Rain gear, no insignia, weapons holstered but visible. The nearest one pointed at the ground in front of her, not at her. At the ground, like she was supposed to understand that staying put was the only reasonable option. He stayed put. The back door of the Suburban opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, not notably tall, but the kind of tall that fills space differently. Dark suit, soaked through and not bothering to acknowledge it. One shirt cuff was rolled up to the elbow on his left arm, and even in the rain, 20 feet away, Alara could see the dark stain on the fabric. Not fresh. 2, maybe 3 hours old. His face was angular and still, the kind of face that had decided a long time ago that expression was a negotiation tactic, and he preferred not to negotiate. His eyes found her immediately. I need the trauma nurse from St. Jude's. His voice carried easily over the rain. Not a shout, just volume, precisely controlled. She was working tonight. Where is she? Alara's grip tightened on the plastic bag. She'd spent 7 years making rapid assessments. Vitals, presentation, urgency, resources available. The nursing brain didn't shut off just because she'd been fired 3 hours ago. She ran through what she was seeing in the same order she always did. The blood on his cuff wasn't his. His hands were steady. His jaw was clenched with the specific tension of a person managing terror by converting it entirely into action. He wasn't threatening her. He was asking her a question with 6 armed men standing in the rain because he needed something she might be able to provide. Why, she said. He took 2 steps forward. Up close, the gray in his eyes was striking, not soft, not warm. The gray of concrete after a cold rain. Someone is bleeding to death in that vehicle. She was recommended as the best trauma nurse on the floor tonight. Are you going to tell me where she is or not? Alara looked past him at the Suburban. There were things you couldn't fake. The way he said bleeding to death flat, controlled, terrified underneath, was not a performance. The way his left hand had moved very slightly toward the vehicle when he said it, like he wanted to turn around and go back, but needed this information first, was not theater. She looked at him. I'm the nurse, she said. I'm the one you're looking for. His name was Roman Vare, and he did not explain who he was. He didn't have to. She'd been a trauma nurse in Chicago for 7 years, and you learned names the way you learned weather patterns, not because you sought them out, but because ignoring them was its own kind of danger. Roman Vare existed in the city the way certain storms existed, present, structural, and best understood from a careful distance. He held the Suburban door open, and she got in. The interior was large and dark, and smelled of copper and sweat, and something medicinal someone had already tried to help. In the far back seat, a young man was propped against the door with a makeshift tourniquet on his left thigh, improvised from what looked like a belt and a rolled section of someone's jacket. He was pale with the specific pallor that Alara recognized as volume loss, not just pain pale, but the pale of a body redirecting blood to organs and abandoning the extremities. His lips had a faint blue tinge. His breathing was shallow and too fast. Late 20s. Dark hair matted to his forehead. He looked, despite everything, like someone who would otherwise be handsome. One of Roman's men was in the back with him, holding pressure above the tourniquet. He looked up above the tourniquet, and he looked up when Alara climbed in with an expression of naked relief that told her he'd been doing this for longer than he'd expected to be doing it. She dropped the plastic bag on the floor. She didn't think about it. She was already leaning across to check the tourniquet. How long ago, she said. 50 minutes. Roman was in the front passenger seat, turned completely around. Maybe an hour. What caliber? 9mm. Single entry. No exit that we could find. He's lost a lot. She pressed 2 fingers to the young man's neck. Pulse was there, rapid, thready, not where she wanted it. This tourniquet is failing. It's not tight enough, and it's too low. Who put it on? I did, said the man beside him. No apology in his voice. He'd done what he could. You kept him alive, Alara said, and meant it. But it needs to come off and go back on. I need you to hold him still. He's going to feel it. She looked at Roman. What's his name? Something crossed Roman's face too fast to name. Nico, he's my brother. She put her hand on Nico's arm. He was conscious, barely, his eyes tracking her, with the slow half-focus of someone running on reserves. Nico, I'm a nurse. My name is Alara. I need to redo this tourniquet, and it's going to hurt for about 10 seconds. You need to let me do it. Nico looked at her. Then he looked at Roman. Roman said something quiet to him in a language she didn't know, and Nico's jaw set, and he gave a single small nod. She redid the tourniquet. He made one sound bitten off, controlled, and then went silent. Counted. The bleeding at the wound site slowed visibly. "Okay," she said. "Where are we going?" Roman's facility was not what she had expected. She'd expected a back room somewhere, a warehouse office, with a table and a first aid kit and the general atmosphere of improvisation. What she found, after a 12-minute drive that Roman's driver took at speeds that suggested he had either a suspended license or complete immunity, was a freight elevator beneath an abandoned industrial building on the city's south end, and below that, a floor she would have described if someone had asked her, which no one did, as the most sophisticated non-hospital medical suite she had ever seen. Space was large, climate-controlled, lit with the same overhead panels as a real OR. There were 2 examination tables, a supply wall that was stocked with more precision than most trauma centers she'd worked in, and a monitoring station with equipment she recognized from the hospital. A generator hummed somewhere behind the walls, providing the kind of power that a facility like this required. She thought whoever built this was very serious. She also thought whoever built this spent real money, which meant real planning, which meant Roman Vare had been preparing for exactly this kind of situation. She did not say either of these things. What she said, when they got Nico onto the table and she did her first full assessment under proper lighting, was, "Where is your surgeon?" Pause. Long enough to be significant. "Unavailable," Roman said. She looked at him. "He can't be reached," Roman said. "We've been trying since the shooting." Alara looked back at Nico. The wound was higher, in the thigh, than the improvised tourniquet had covered. Cleanly, the bullet had nicked at minimum a significant branch of the femoral system. She could see it. She could understand exactly what was happening inside that leg. She could walk someone through what needed to happen next. She was a nurse. She could manage. She could stabilize. Could buy time and maintain circulation and monitor for shock and make decisions within the scope of what her training and her 7 years of trauma floor experience actually authorized her to do. What she could not do ethically or practically was open a leg and repair a vascular injury. "Can't do surgery," she said. "I'm not asking you to do surgery. You need surgery. He needs vascular repair, probably within the next couple of hours, or this tourniquet becomes a permanent solution and you lose the leg. Best case." Roman's face did not change. She was starting to understand that this was his default, that whatever was happening behind those gray eyes was kept behind a wall that he had built very deliberately over a very long time. "Can you keep him stable until I can get a surgical team here?" She looked at Nico. His coloring was still bad, but the tourniquet was holding properly now, and his pressure was better than it had been in the vehicle. He was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a person conserving energy for the hard part. "Yes," she said, "but I need everything on that supply wall. And I need someone to assist me, and I need you to understand that if his condition changes faster than I can manage it alone, we're out of options. Name what you need." I just did. Roman looked at one of his men, a compact, quiet-faced man named Dex, who seemed to function as his operational right hand, and said something short. Dex nodded and moved to the supply wall. Roman turned back to her. $20,000. Tonight when Nico is stable. Cash. She almost said something sharp. She swallowed it because it wasn't useful, and also so because, in the brutal arithmetic of the moment, fired. Broke, $238, and a tearing plastic bag, $20,000, was the difference between surviving the next month and not. "I'm not staying because of the money," she said. "I'm staying because he's my patient now, and I don't walk away from patients." "Keep telling yourself that," Roman said quietly, and turned away before she could respond. The first hour was work. Pure, focused, mechanical work, the kind that her body knew how to do independent of whatever her mind was doing with the rest of the situation. She got a line in, got fluids running, got Nico's pressure up to something she could defend, and then she began the slower, harder work of monitoring the wound site, watching the tourniquet, watching his face for the signs of pain that he was clearly trying not to show her. Nico was, she discovered, not entirely unconscious or entirely cooperative. He drifted in and out of a state that was more resignation, than rest, eyes sometimes open, sometimes closed, sometimes tracking her movements with an attention that seemed more curious than afraid. Somewhere around the second hour, when she was checking his pressure for the fourth time and writing numbers in the margin of a supply requisition form she'd found, because she had no other paper, he said, "You're the fired one." She looked at him. "What?" Roman had someone check. His voice was rough from dehydration and blood loss, but coherent. "St. Jude's trauma floor. Best on-call nurse. Except she got fired tonight." A pause. "You." "Yes." "Why?" "I saved someone who wasn't supposed to be saved in the order things were supposed to happen." Nico was quiet for a moment. "That's a stupid reason to fire someone." "Yes. Roman fires people for better reasons than that." She glanced toward the far side of the facility, where Roman had been standing with Dex for the past 20 minutes, both of them speaking in low voices over a phone that Roman checked every few minutes with the specific energy of someone managing multiple deteriorating situations at once. "I'll take your word for it. He's not." Nico stopped, breathed. "He does what he has to do. That's all. That's the whole thing. Get some rest, Nico. He doesn't usually bring women here. I'm not a woman he brought here. I'm a nurse," he conscripted. Something that might have been a smile moved across Nico's face and then disappeared beneath the pain. "Yeah. Okay. Sure." Roman came to stand beside her near the third hour. She was charting still on the supply form, which now had 2 columns of numbers, a medication log, and a note about Nico's latest pressure reading. Roman looked at the form for a moment without speaking. "Do that? Write everything down? Documentation is how you prove what you did and why, especially in situations where someone might later want to pretend the decisions went differently." She didn't look up. Learned that early. Smart, practical. She capped the pen. "Your surgeon, what happened to him?" Roman's silence had a texture to it. She'd been a nurse long enough to recognize when someone was deciding how much to say. He stared at Nico's profile for a moment. Nico was asleep. Genuinely, finally, which she'd worked for deliberately, with careful dosing from the facility's supply. "He was reached before we could reach him," Roman said. "People who shot Nico did it." She absorbed that. "Someone inside your organization." He looked at her. A flat, assessing look, the look of a person recalibrating what they're willing to say to someone who is proving more perceptive than expected. "Yes," he said. "Someone inside, and they knew who your surgeon was." "Yes." "Which means they know about this facility." The look on his face told her she was right before he said anything. He didn't look angry, exactly. He looked like a man who had already run this calculation and arrived at the same answer and hated it. "Possibly. We're operating on that assumption. So we might not be as secure as you'd like. We're as secure as we can be right now." She nodded. She put the pen down on the supply form. She thought about Gerald Watts, who was alive in the cardiac ICU at St. Jude's because she'd refused to wait. She thought about the plastic bag on the floor of the Suburban and the $238 in her account. She thought about Nico's color, which was better than it had been an hour ago, and the way his breathing had evened out into something she could work with. "Your brother said, you don't usually bring women here," she said. "He talks too much when he's medicated. He's worried about you." Roman looked at her again. This time it was a different look, shorter, more complicated. "He's always worried about me. It's his worst quality. It seems like a good quality to me. It gets him into trouble," she thought. "It got him shot tonight." But she didn't say that either, because she was beginning to understand that Roman Vare knew everything she might say to him, and had said it to himself already, and the last thing he needed was someone performing concern at him. "Get some rest if you can," she said. "You have blood on your cuff." He looked down at his left sleeve. Then he looked back at her. "It's his, I know." He walked away. She went back to her numbers. Outside the facility, Chicago kept raining, and the night moved towards something she couldn't name yet, something that felt, in the specific way that bad nights always felt, like it wasn't finished with any of them. Near dawn, Nico's pressure dropped. Not catastrophically, not yet, but enough. She caught it on the fourth check of the early morning cycle, when the number came up lower than it should have been given his current fluid balance, and she held very still for a moment looking at the monitor, running the possibilities in rapid sequence the way she'd been trained to do. And none of the possibilities she arrived at were good. Roman. He was across the room. He was there in seconds. He looked at the monitor. He looked at her face, reading it. What? His pressure is dropping. It shouldn't be. The tourniquet is intact. The wound site looks the same, which means he's bleeding somewhere else. Internally. Possibly. Or the vascular damage is more extensive than what we can see. Either way, he needs surgery now. Where is your surgical team? 40 minutes out. She made herself not show him what she felt about that answer. The alarm went off. Not a medical alarm. Security alarm. A sound she didn't know but which everyone else in the room knew. Because Roman and Dex and the other two men present moved simultaneously toward 3 different points in the room, and the specific manner in which they moved made her stomach drop. Roman turned to her. His face was completely controlled. Terror was still there underneath, but further down than it had been at any point in the night. Stay with him. Don't leave this room. On the security monitor, above the supply wall, she hadn't noticed it before. Small screen, high corner, she saw what had triggered the alarm. The building above them. Its surrounding perimeter. Covered. At least a dozen figures, moving in coordinated formation. Roman, he was already at the door. He stopped without turning. Stay with him. She turned back to Nico. His eyes were open. He'd woken at the alarm groggy, not fully conscious, but tracking. He looked at her face, and then at the door where Roman had been, and then back at her. How bad? He said. She picked up the monitoring leads and reattached the one that had slipped. We're handling it. Alara. She looked at him. How bad? She reached across and tightened the blanket over him. A nurse gesture. The kind of gesture that was practical and also human, and also bought her exactly the 2 seconds she needed to decide what she was going to say. Your brother is handling it. My job is you. So let me do my job. Nico looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded and closed his eyes, and she could see the effort it cost him to do that, to trust her, in a facility under siege, with his blood pressure dropping and his brother somewhere on the other side of a door that was now absorbing the sound of gunfire. She checked his pressure again. She wrote the number down. She did not leave the room. The weapon Roman had placed on the supply cart beside her, before he'd left, sat there and did not ask her anything. She didn't touch it. Not yet. Somewhere above them, Chicago was still raining. And the worst part of the night, the part that would change everything, was just now beginning. She apologized for breaking the glass. Then the mafia boss saw her bleeding, bruised hands. Fictional story created entirely for artistic and entertainment purposes. The hook, the crystal, shatters at midnight. In the silent dining room of the Caldero estate, 26-year-old Elena Vavale drops to her knees, staring at the broken glass scattered across the marble floor. I'm sorry, she whispers. Across the room, Matteo Veyron, the feared head of Chicago's most powerful criminal empire, turns slowly toward her. Everyone expects anger. Instead, Matteo notices something no one else sees. Elena's hands are trembling. Her knuckles are bruised. Fresh cuts run across her palms, and none of those injuries came from the glass. When Matteo asks what happened, Elena immediately hides her hands behind her back. I'm clumsy, Mr. Veyron. Matteo has spent his entire life recognizing lies. That one terrifies him. Because Elena was hired 3 days earlier as a temporary housekeeper, and someone inside his heavily guarded mansion has already made her afraid to speak. The escalation Matteo quietly investigates Elena while pretending he knows nothing. The first twist comes when security footage reveals Elena entering a locked hallway every night after midnight. Instead of stealing, she's been secretly repairing damaged family photographs and returning objects that someone else deliberately destroyed. Then Matteo discovers something stranger. Elena isn't working for his enemies. She is searching for evidence connected to her missing older brother, Noah Vale, a former accountant who disappeared after discovering financial records inside Matteo's organization. Matteo confronts her. Elena finally admits the truth. Noah believed someone inside the Veyron Empire was secretly transferring millions through legitimate companies. Before disappearing, he left Elena one warning. Never trust the man who looks like Matteo's friend. Matteo realizes the message points toward his longtime lieutenant, Dorian Rusk, the one person who has stood beside him for 15 years. But before Matteo can act, another twist hits. Elena finds Noah's hidden ledger, but the final pages reveal that Noah wasn't merely investigating the organization. He had been working undercover for someone inside the Empire, someone Matteo believed had died years ago, the point of no return. During a violent confrontation at an abandoned warehouse, Matteo discovers the truth. Dorian has been manipulating the organization from within, using Noah to expose Matteo's weaknesses and preparing to seize control. Dorian isn't acting alone. Elena's former employer, the elegant and seemingly harmless Maribel Crane, has been supplying information to him. Then Matteo learns the most devastating secret of all. Elena was never accidentally hired. Dorian deliberately placed her inside Matteo's mansion because he knew Matteo would eventually become protective of her. She was supposed to be bait. Elena breaks down, convinced Matteo will never forgive her. Instead, Matteo tells her she has one choice: walk away forever, or help him bring the entire conspiracy into the light. Elena chooses to stay. For the first time, Matteo realizes she isn't simply surviving his world. She's willing to fight for the truth. The climax, Dorian launches his final move during a lavish Veyron charity gala, secretly turning Matteo's own security network against him. The mansion locks down. Phones go dead. Trusted guards turn on one another. Matteo is trapped inside the building with Elena as Dorian announces that the Veyron Empire now belongs to him. But Dorian makes one fatal mistake. He assumes Elena is frightened enough to surrender. Instead, she reveals that she discovered Noah's final encrypted file before the gala. The file contains proof of Dorian's entire operation, including recordings that expose Maribel and several corrupt executives. Dorian tries to destroy the evidence, but Matteo has already anticipated him. The blackout was never Dorian's victory. It was Matteo's trap. In a tense final confrontation, Matteo corners Dorian in the same dining room where the broken glass first revealed Elena's injuries. Dorian finally confesses that he orchestrated Noah's disappearance and manipulated Matteo for years. Matteo's rage nearly consumes him, but Elena stops him. Don't become the man he wanted you to become. Those words break through the fury. Matteo chooses justice over revenge. Dorian and his accomplices are taken down. The financial network is exposed, and Noah is finally found alive, having been held under an assumed identity while gathering evidence. The resolution weeks later, the Caldero estate is almost unrecognizable. The guards have been replaced. The corrupt businesses are dismantled. Matteo begins rebuilding his empire through legitimate companies, determined to end the cycle that nearly destroyed his family. Elena prepares to leave. She believes her role in Matteo's life is finished, but Matteo stops her at the front door. He doesn't ask her to stay because she owes him anything. He simply tells her that, for the first time in his life, he wants a future that isn't built on fear. Elena looks at her healed hands, then at the man who once terrified an entire city, but learned that protecting someone did not mean controlling them. Stays, not as a servant, not as bait, and not as a victim. As Matteo finally closes the door on his criminal past, the broken crystal glass from that first night remains framed on the wall, a reminder of the moment everything changed. One shattered glass, one hidden truth, and two people who survived long enough to choose a different life. The first shot came through the ceiling. Not a bullet, a sound. A sharp percussive crack from somewhere above the facility's reinforced roof, followed by the distant thud of boots on concrete, and then a second sound that was worse than the first. Silence. The kind of silence that meant the men up there had stopped moving, because they'd found what they were looking for. Alara had one hand on Nico's wrist pulse check, automatic when the lights went to emergency red. The main overheads died. The generator compensated within 2 seconds, exactly as it was designed to. But 2 seconds in emergency red with gunfire audible through the walls, and a patient whose pressure was already dropping, was 2 seconds too many. She used them to cross to the supply wall, grab the portable monitoring unit she'd identified 3 hours earlier as the backup she would need if the main system failed, and clip it to Nico's existing leads without breaking the connection. That's the backup power, Nico said from the table. Yes. Roman designed the redundancy himself. He spent 6 weeks on it. Good for him. Don't talk. It raises your pressure. My pressure can use the help. She almost said something. She didn't. She was watching the numbers on the portable unit settle into a new baseline lower than she wanted, but stable enough for the moment, and simultaneously listening to what was happening on the other side of the facility door. Boots. Movement. Roman's voice, once. Sharp and brief a command. Not a conversation. Then more boots. Then 2 shots, close together. The sound bouncing through the ventilation in a way that made the direction impossible to read. Dex appeared in the doorway. He was breathing hard, not panicking, but working. There was a cut above his left ear that was bleeding freely down his jaw, and he didn't acknowledge it. We have a perimeter breach on the east access. They came through the freight elevator shaft. Someone cut the manual override from inside the building. Alara's hand stopped moving. From inside. Someone was already in the building when we arrived. Waiting. She looked at him. They knew we were coming here. Yes. She looked at Nico. Nico had his eyes open, and he was looking at the ceiling with an expression she recognized from her years, the expression of someone doing math in their head and not liking the answer. The traitor, he said. Don't, she started. I know who it is. His voice was flat. Not angry. Certain. I've known for 3 weeks, and I didn't tell Roman because I needed more proof. If I'd told him, he stopped. The monitor beeped a single soft warning. If I'd told him, we wouldn't be here. Dex went very still in the doorway. Alara said carefully, who? Nico looked at her. Then he looked at Dex. Something passed between them, not a look of accusation, but of calibration, of a person deciding in real time who was safe and who wasn't, and how much it cost to be wrong. Get Roman, Nico said to Dex. He's managing the east breach. Get Roman. Dex looked at Alara. She didn't know why he looked at her. She had no standing here, no history, no claim on any of them. But she understood that he was looking at her, the way people sometimes looked at nurses, which was the way people looked at someone who had demonstrated, repeatedly and without fanfare, that they were not going to run. She gave him a short nod. He disappeared back through the door. Nico's hand found her wrist. Not grabbing, not desperate. Just contact. The way patients sometimes reached for her in the worst moments, not because they needed her to do something, but because they needed to know someone was still there. His name is Cassian, Nico said. Cassian Farrell. He's been Roman's financial director for 4 years. He's also been selling position information to a group called the Veld Consortium for at least 18 months. I found a pattern in the wire transfers 6 weeks ago. I've been documenting it. His thumb pressed once against her wrist. Light. Involuntary. The evidence is on a drive in my apartment. Roman doesn't know the drive exists. Why didn't you tell him? Because Cassian is careful, and Roman trusts him completely. And if I came to Roman with a pattern in wire transfers, and Roman confronted Cassian and Cassian had time to destroy the physical records, we'd lose everything. I needed the hard copy. I needed it to be airtight. His jaw tightened. I was 2 days away, and instead you got shot. Instead, I got shot. She looked at his monitor. The pressure had dipped another 3 points while he was talking. Nico, stop talking. I mean it this time. If something happens to me before Roman gets here, nothing is happening to you while I'm in this room. That's not a comfort, it's a threat. Stop talking. He almost smiled. It didn't reach anywhere too much pain, too much blood loss, but the shape of it was there. You're aggressive for a nurse. I'm aggressive for a person. Stop talking. He stopped talking. She adjusted his IV rate, watching the fluid column, watching the monitor, listening to the sounds beyond the door with a part of her brain that had no medical training and was purely animal and afraid. The gunfire had moved further from the facility's main entrance, which was either good or very bad Minini, depending on what it meant about where the attackers were now. Roman came through the door 90 seconds later. He had his jacket gone. His shirt was torn at the left shoulder, and there was a graze along his forearm that he'd wrapped with what appeared to be a section of electrical tape, which told her something about the man's relationship with improvisation and also about his pain tolerance. He looked at the monitor first, then at her, then at Nico. He needs to tell you something, Alara said. I heard, Roman said. She blinked. There are mics in the facility. Medical monitoring backup, they pick up audio. I heard everything, Nico said. He crossed to the table and stood beside his brother, and for a moment his face did something it hadn't done once in the entire night. It cracked, just along the edges, a compression around the mouth, a tightening of the brow, and then it was gone. Locked back behind whatever wall he'd built between himself and the things that cost him something. You should have told me. I know, Nico said. 3 weeks. You knew for 3 weeks. I know. I know, Roman. Nico's voice was quiet and exhausted and entirely without defense. I was trying to protect you from making a mistake before we had proof. Cassian has been with you for 4 years. Without hard evidence, you would have handled it wrong. You would have gone at him angry, and he would have run, and we'd have lost the financial records, and you would have lost 4 years of operations documentation. His eyes didn't leave Roman's face. I was trying to protect the organization. You got shot. I'm aware. Roman put his hand on Nico's shoulder, not a grip, not a squeeze. Just a placement. The way you set something down carefully because you are afraid of breaking it. He stood like that for exactly 3 seconds. Then he pulled his hand back and turned to Alara. His pressure dropped. Yes. How much time do we have before it becomes critical? She gave him the honest answer, which was the only answer she knew how to give. At his current rate of decline, we have approximately 40 minutes before I'm out of options with the equipment here. Your surgical team, 22 minutes. They hit traffic at the expressway interchange. There's an accident blocking 2 lanes. He said it with the specific flatness of a man who had run the contingency and found it inadequate. I need you to hold him for 22 minutes. I need you to keep whoever's outside that door, for 22 minutes. He looked at her. Something passed across his face, not gratitude, exactly, but recognition. The look of a person seeing, for the first time, that someone else in the room is making the same calculation they are and arriving at the same answer. We are going to hold this together, or we are not going to hold it at all. Dex. He raised his voice toward the door. Dex materialized immediately. He'd gotten the cut on his head covered with a piece of gauze, taped too loosely, and Alara made a mental note to redo it when she had 2 seconds, because the tape was already losing adhesion. Seal the east corridor. Use the secondary barrier the manual locks, not the electronic ones. If they've been in this building long enough to cut the freight elevator override, they've had access to our access codes. Go physical only from here forward. Dex nodded. And Forel? The name landed in the room like a dropped instrument. Roman's expression didn't shift. Where is he? Last confirmed location was the Meridian office building. Called in a security check 40 minutes ago routine. The kind that establishes a paper trail. That's when I knew. You knew before I did. Dex met his eyes steadily. I suspected. I didn't want to. You suspected and you didn't tell me. I didn't have confirmation. You had suspicion. Roman's voice had gone very quiet. Not cold, quieter than cold. The kind of quiet that had weight. In this organization, suspicion is information. I need information. All of it. Regardless of what you think I'm going to do with it. Dex said nothing. We're going to talk about this when Nico is out of surgery, and the facility is clear. Go seal the east corridor. Dex went. Alara had been watching the monitor while this happened, keeping her hands moving, keeping her attention split between the numbers in front of her and the conversation behind her. Now she said, without turning, how many loyal men do you have in this building right now? 4. Against how many outside? We've neutralized 3. Initial count suggested 8 to 10. She did the math. That's not good. No. Are any of them trying to get into this room specifically? Roman was quiet for half a beat. The east breach is moving toward the medical wing. Yes. She turned around then. He was standing 6 feet from her, his arms loose at his sides, the makeshift bandage on his forearm, already showing a faint pink bloom through the electrical tape. His face was completely composed and completely exhausted, and beneath both of those things was something she recognized from her ER years. From the worst nights, the faces of people who had made a decision to hold on and were holding and would not let themselves look at what holding was costing them. She said, "Give me your arm." He looked at her. The graze. You wrapped it with electrical tape, that's not a thing you do. Give me your arm. I'm aware of better options. I used what was available. I have better options right here. She was already moving to the supply wall. Sit down. Not on the table, on the stool. Nico needs the table. Roman didn't sit, but he came to the supply wall and held out his left arm, and she unwrapped the electrical tape with the scissors from her kit, fast, efficient, and cleaned the graze with antiseptic that made his forearm muscle jump once. Involuntarily, which was the first purely uncontrolled physical reaction she'd seen from him in the entire night. "That stings," she said. "I noticed." "Good. That means you're still paying attention." She put a proper dressing on, taped it with actual medical tape, pressed the edges down. Cassian Farrell. You trusted him. Evidently a miscalculation. For 4 years. Yes. What does that do to you? He looked down at her hands, finishing the dressing. She was close enough that she could see the exact color of the shadows under his eyes, the depth of a man who hadn't slept in too long, and whose night was still, by any reasonable measure, getting worse. "What does it do to me?" he repeated. Not a question. A restatement, the way people repeated things back when they were deciding whether to answer. "You don't have to tell me. It makes me want to be very precise," he said. "About consequences." She pressed the last piece of tape down and stepped back. "I'll bet it does." She went back to Nico. His pressure had dropped another point. She adjusted the fluid rate and checked the tourniquet and wrote the new number on the supply form, and did not let herself think about what very precise consequences meant from a man like Roman Vare. The sound from the east corridor changed. Closer, heavier. The sound of a physical barrier being tested, not gunfire, but force, methodical and sustained. The kind of sound that a manual lock made when someone was working a ram against it. "Roman," she said it quietly. "I hear it." 2 of his men appeared in the doorway, the 2 she'd seen earlier, who hadn't spoken once in the entire night. They looked at Roman. "Roman." Roman looked at the door, the sequence of looks at the 2 seconds, and produced a decision she could read in the way they deployed into positions at the 2 corners of the room. Roman crossed to the supply cart beside Nico's table. He picked up the weapon he'd left there earlier, a compact pistol, dark, professional, and set it within Alara's reach. Not in her hand, on the cart. "Close enough." "I told you before," she said. "You told me you didn't want it. I'm telling you it's there." He looked at her straight. "If someone comes through that door and it isn't me, or one of my men, you use it. I'm a nurse. Right now you're the only thing between my brother and a surgical table he can't reach yet. Be whatever that requires." He moved to the door. She looked at the weapon. She looked at Nico. She looked at the monitor. 20 minutes. She needed to hold for 20 minutes. The sea came. The surgical team would arrive, and she could hand this off to people with the training and the credentials and the equipment to close what she had only been able to hold open. The ram hit the east barrier again. This time it sounded different, the sound of something beginning to give. Nico's eyes were open. He was watching the ceiling. He said very quietly, so that only she could hear, "He was going to name the facility after our mother. When it was finished, he never told anyone that." She looked at him. "I just thought someone should know," he said. She put her hand on his arm, the same nurse gesture, practical and human, and covering the 2 seconds she needed to collect herself. "I know," she said. "Now I know." The barrier gave. The sound was distinctive, the specific crack of a manual lock failing under sustained force, and it was followed immediately by the sounds of the corridor beyond it, filling with movement. Roman's voice, shouting now, the first time all night she'd heard him raise it. "Turn fire." A crash of something large and heavy. Boots. Alara picked up the weapon. She held it the way she'd been shown once, years ago, by an ex-boyfriend who'd been a firearms instructor and who had spent a patient weekend teaching her the basics. Because he'd said everyone living in this city ought to know. She'd been a good student. She'd never once thought she'd use it. She positioned herself between the door and Nico's table. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she let them shake, because fighting, it would cost energy she needed for aim. The door opened. Not Roman, not Dex. Not any of the men she'd spent the last 5 hours learning to read. A man she had never seen, tactical vest. No insignia, moving with the low, rapid crouch of someone trained to clear a room. He came in fast, and his eyes went immediately to Nico on the table, which told her everything about what his orders were. She said, "Stop." He looked at her. He processed her, a woman in scrubs with a medical kit at her hip, and a pistol held in 2 hands at center mass, and she could see the split-second recalculation in his eyes, the assessment of whether she was real or not. She fired once. She aimed for his thigh, the way she'd been taught, and she hit it, and he went down hard on the left side. clipping the supply cart on his way to the floor, and the noise of it was enormous and physical, and immediately, completely real. He was alive. He was swearing. He was not moving toward Nico. Her ears were ringing. She kept the weapon up. She stepped sideways, putting herself between him and the table, and she glanced at the monitor, pressure dropping now, the noise and movement and stress of the last 30 seconds accelerating what had already been happening too slowly, and she reached one-handed for the portable monitor to recheck the leads and found that her hand was entirely steady. That surprised her. Roman came through the door 10 seconds later. He looked at the man on the floor. He looked at Alara. He looked at the weapon in her hands and then at her face, and whatever he saw there made him stop, completely still, for exactly 1 second, which was the longest she'd seen him stop all night. He was going for Nico, she said. I know. I aimed for the leg. I know. He came into the room, and she lowered the weapon, and he was close enough, now that she could see the new damage, another cut, this one along his jaw, fresh, still bleeding. He had not come through the last 20 minutes intact, but he was upright, and his eyes were clear, and that was enough. He looked at Nico. Nico looked back at him from the table, with an expression that was mostly a relief that people felt when they'd been running math, and the answer finally came out right. He tried to call it, Nico said, meaning the man on the floor. I heard him trying to call it in. I don't think he got through. He didn't, Roman said. He crouched beside the man, not gently, not roughly, but with precise economy, and removed the communications device from his vest and looked at the screen and stood back up. His face had gone back to the controlled mask, but the edges were different now. The edges were sharper. The Veld Consortium put 8 men in this building, and we have all 8 of them. It's over for tonight. And Forel? Dex said from the doorway. Roman looked at the communications device. He looked at the door. He looked at his brother. Forel already knows the operation failed, he said. He'll run. I need to know where before he does. He turned to Dex. Get the financial team on the wire transfer accounts tonight. Freeze every channel Forel has access to. Everyone. If he so much as tries to move $1, I want to know which direction he's running before he takes the second step. Dex was gone again. Roman turned to Alara. She was still standing between the door and Nico's table, weapon lowered, ears still ringing from the single shot, scrubs spattered with something she hadn't noticed yet. She became aware, very suddenly, of how her legs felt the specific heaviness of a body that had been running on adrenaline for 5 hours and was beginning to present the bill. You held him, Roman said. Yes. The surgical team is 7 minutes out. Good. She looked at the monitor. His pressure is at a point where 7 minutes matters. So let's talk about what we're going to do in the next 7 minutes instead of about what already happened. Roman looked at her for a long moment. She couldn't read what was in his face. It was too layered, too compressed. The kind of look that had multiple answers running underneath a surface. She wasn't going to penetrate tonight. But he nodded, and he moved to his brother's side. And he stayed there. She pulled on gloves and checked Nico's wound site and updated the numbers on the supply form and did not think about the man on the floor or the single shot she had fired or the way her arm had been. Completely steady when it should have been shaking. She'd thought her whole career that there was a line between her world and Roman Vare's, that it was a real line, fixed with clear ground on either side. She understood now, in the particular way, you understood things that couldn't be undone, that she had crossed it, not toward him, not for him, for a patient on a table who was still alive because she had refused to move, crossed regardless, and there was no version of the morning that put her back on the other side. The surgical team arrived in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Alara knew because she counted. Not consciously, her mind was doing other things, managing Nico's IV rate and monitoring the wound site and listening to the corridor beyond the door with the part of her brain that had now been reassigned to threat assessment. But the counting happened anyway. The way her body kept doing its job, even when the rest of her was trying to process the fact that she had fired a weapon at a human being 20 minutes ago. And the human being was still alive on the floor, in the corner, with a zip tie around his wrists and a wound she had not yet treated, because Nico was her patient, and Nico came first. She would treat it. She would. That was the thing about being a nurse. The instinct didn't have an off switch based on which side of a situation someone was on. But first, Nico. The surgical team was 3 people, a compact, fast-moving woman named Dr. Sina, who had the clipped authority of someone who'd been called into bad situations before and had stopped asking questions about the circumstances. Scrub tech named Marcus, who set up the instrument tray with the automatic efficiency of a person who could do it in the dark. And an anesthesiologist, older, whose name Alara never caught, who looked once at the facility's equipment and nodded with the quiet approval of some, confirming that the rumors about this place were accurate. Alara gave Dr. Senna the handoff in 90 seconds flat. Time of injury, estimated blood loss, tourniquet placement and duration, fluid input, current pressure, the suspected vascular involvement based on presentation, and every number she'd written on the supply form in her compressed nursing shorthand, which Dr. Senna read without slowing down, while simultaneously pulling on gloves and snapping instructions to Marcus. At the end of it, Dr. Senna looked at her. "You stabilized this yourself? For 5 hours? I had equipment. You had half of what you'd need. Who are you?" "I'm the nurse who was here," Alara said. "He's your patient now." She stepped back from the table. Her legs nearly went. Not dramatically, she didn't collapse, didn't grab anything. But her knees made their displeasure known in the specific way that knees did when a body had been refusing to acknowledge them for too long. And she took one sideways step that she covered by moving toward the supply wall, and she put her hand against it and breathed. Roman was watching her. She felt it before she saw it, the particular weight of being observed by someone who was paying close attention. She turned her head. He was standing against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes on her face, and there was something in the look that she recognized from the patients who'd been through the worst of it and come out, and were now doing the thing people did after crisis, which was noticing the humans who'd been beside them. She looked away first. She went to the man on the floor. He was conscious. His wound her shot, clean through the lateral thigh. No arterial involvement, which she had calculated before she'd pulled the trigger because she was a trauma nurse, and she had been tissue, and she had been bleeding and anatomy. Her entire career had been the makeshift compression one of Roman's men had applied. Crouched beside him, he looked at her. His eyes were hard and not particularly afraid. "I'm going to dress this," she said. "I don't need. I know what you need better than you do right now." She opened her kit. "Hold still." He held still. She worked. He didn't speak again until she was taping the second layer of the dressing, and when he did speak, it was quiet and it was not directed at her. "It wasn't supposed to go this way," he said. She kept working. "It never is." Forel said the nurse would be gone by midnight, that Roman would clear the facility. Her hands paused for exactly half a second. Then they continued. Forel was wrong about a lot of things. He said the brother was already dead. She pressed the last piece of tape. She sat back on her heels and looked at the man's face. He was maybe 30 younger up close than he'd seemed moving through the doorway. His expression had changed. Not soft, not apologetic, but the specific expression of someone who had just received information that recalibrated something. "He's not dead," she said. "I can see that." She stood. She looked at Roman, who had heard every word, and whose face had gone to a specific kind of stillness that she associated, now, with his most dangerous moments. "Forel told them Nico was already dead," Roman said. "Yes," she said, "before the attack. He told them in advance. He said it with the quiet of a man building a structure, placing pieces in sequence. He wasn't reporting what happened. He was telling them what was supposed to happen." She said nothing. That was his math to do. "Nico was the target," Roman said. "Not the facility, not the organization. Nico specifically. The attack on the compound was cover for what was supposed to already be done." He looked at the man on the floor. "Forel was going to have Nico dead before your team arrived. The attack was insurance, cleanup." The man on the floor said nothing. Roman crouched in front of him, and the quality of his stillness at that proximity was something Alara decided to watch from across the room. "What does Forel know that Nico was about to tell me?" "Nothing. I can ask this in ways that are considerably less comfortable for you. I don't know what Forel knows." The man's voice was flat, professional, the voice of someone trained to hold under questioning. I know what my team was paid to do. We were paid to clear the compound and confirm elimination of the secondary target. That's all, secondary. Roman's voice changed register. Who's the primary? The man's eyes went somewhere else, not evasive. Exactly. But careful. The way eyes went when the answer to a question was more dangerous than the question itself. Roman stood up. He looked at Dex. Dex understood something from that look that Alara didn't, and she decided that was fine. There were whole systems of communication in this room that she wasn't meant to read, and she was too tired to try. She went back to the supply wall and sat on the stool and put her hands in her lap and let them shake for the first time. They shook for about 45 seconds. Then she made them stop, because she could hear the surgical team working on the other side of the room, and Nico's monitor was still beeping in its steady, maintained rhythm, and both of those things required her to be functional. Roman came and stood beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. She was aware of his presence, the way she was aware of changes in atmospheric pressure, not intrusive, but registrable. He had a cup of water. He held it out. She took it and drank half of it and felt the cold move down through her chest and land somewhere useful. Secondary target, she said. Yes. Do you know who the primary is? He was quiet for 3 seconds. I have a theory. Is the theory about you? He looked at her sideways. Why do you ask it that way? Because Nico was the target, and Nico was about to give you information about Pharrell. If Pharrell wanted to stop that information, he'd go for Nico. But if someone wanted to stop what you'd do with that information once you had it, she stopped. She handed the cup back. That's your world, not mine. I'm just thinking out loud. Keep thinking out loud, Roman said. You're useful. I'm a nurse. You're a great many things. He took the cup. You should sleep. Nico's still in surgery. Senna has him. I know. I'm still not sleeping. He accepted that without argument. She appreciated it. She was too tired to fight about whether she was allowed to wait. The surgery took 2 hours and 11 minutes. Alara knew because she counted, Doctor. Senna came out with her gloves off and her expression arranged in the particular neutral that surgeons used when the news was good, but they'd learned to deliver it without drama, because drama in either direction cost everyone something. Muscular repair successful. We've restored circulation. He's going to keep the leg. He'll be in recovery for several days, minimum, but the acute threat is resolved. Roman stood. He'd been sitting on the floor near the far wall for the last hour, not slumped, not folded, but sitting with his back against the wall and his arms resting on his knees in the posture of a man who had decided that the floor was honest in a way that chairs weren't. He stood in one motion, smooth, and Alara noticed that his face when he stood was 3 degrees different from his face when he'd sat down. Some specific tension was gone. Not all of it, but some. Can I see him? He's sedated. You can sit with him. Senna looked at Roman with the Frank's assessment of a person who'd dealt with men like this before. You need fluids and you need sleep, in that order. You're running on empty. Thank you, Dr. Senna. The dismissal was polite and absolute, and Senna accepted it with the equanimity of a person who recognized it as the only answer available. Turned to Alara. You did good work in there. The documentation, especially that fluid log, kept us from doubling up on interventions that would have complicated the repair. Alara nodded. Thank you. Senna and her team moved to the recovery area. Roman looked at Alara. Come with me, he said. She followed him to a room. She hadn't been in a secondary space off the main corridor, fitted out as a sparse office, a desk, 2 chairs, a monitor connected to the facility's security system. Dex was already there. He had his laptop open, and his face arranged in the expression of a person who had found something and was deciding how to present it. Pharrell? Roman said. He's moving. Dex turned the laptop to face them. Wire transfer initiated 40 minutes ago. We caught it at the freeze, which means he tried to move the money and couldn't, and now he knows we know. His vehicle transponder put him on the 90 heading northwest at 1:14 a.m. We lost the signal at the Elgin interchange. He switched vehicles. He had a backup. He had several backups. He's been preparing this for longer than 18 months. Dex's voice was level, but there was something underneath it that Alara could hear the specific tone of a person delivering information they felt personally responsible for. I found the first anomaly in the operational security logs. Forel has been copying facility access records for at least 2 years. Not the financial transfers the physical access like. Entry and exit logs for every VAR facility in the metro area. He sold the locations. Roman stood very still. All of them, Dex said. Every location. Including this one. Including the Northside warehouse. Including the stop. Roman's voice was quiet. All of them. Yes. The word sat in the room like something physical. Alara watched Roman's face. She watched the thing that happened to it, not a crack this time. Not the edge compression she'd seen with Nico. Something different. Something that was the face of a man who had just had the floor removed from a room he'd built carefully over many years, and was in the process of determining whether he was falling or whether he had already landed. 2 years, Roman said, at minimum. Possibly longer. I can only confirm what's in the logs. The earliest verified copy dates are 26 months ago. The Hamburg incident. Roman set it to the wall. The Amsterdam supply chain. The Meridian account freeze. He turned to Dex. Every operation that failed in the last 2 years. Every one. Possibly, I can't confirm causation yet. But the timing. Timing is confirmation enough. His voice had gone somewhere. Alara hadn't heard it go before. Not cold. Not controlled. Something that was the substrate beneath cold and controlled. The thing those qualities existed to cover. How many people died in operations that failed because Forel sold our locations? Dex closed his laptop. He didn't answer. How many, Dex? 11 confirmed. Possibly 14. The number landed. Alara made herself breathe normally and not show what she felt about that number, because this was not her room, and these were not her dead, and she was not going to perform any emotion in front of Roman Vare that she hadn't actually felt herself. She had actually felt something, a cold, specific nausea, the feeling of a person hearing that a betrayal extended much further than anyone knew, and she kept it in her chest where it belonged, and kept her face even. Roman sat down. Not in the desk chair, in the closer of the 2 chairs, the one that faced the door, and the way he sat in it was different from the way he had sat on the floor outside the OR, that had been controlled, waiting. This was something else. This was a man putting himself in a chair because standing was no longer the right posture for what he was carrying. Forel has been operating as an agent of the Veld Consortium for at least 2 years, he said. Not to Dex, not to Alara. To himself, out loud, the way people said things when they needed to hear them in order to believe them. He has given them every operational location. He has given them enough information to be responsible for 14 deaths inside this organization. And he was in the room when I made decisions that I believed only trusted people could hear. Dex said nothing. What did I tell him in those 2 years? Roman's voice was entirely level. Entirely. The leveling was the most frightening thing about it. What did I say in rooms with Forel that I would not have said otherwise?
Roman, what did he hear?
Dex opened his laptop again, pulled up a file. He turned the screen. The file was long, a column of dates and annotated entries, dense, clearly compiled from multiple sources. Everything that was said in meetings where Forel was present and where the recording logs show his device was active. I've been compiling it since I found the first anomaly. He stopped. Roman looked at him. I didn't tell you because the list was too long, Dex said, and because I wasn't certain, and because the list included things I'd said in rooms where I'd asked him to be present. That compromised information I was responsible for protecting. His jaw was tight. I didn't tell you because part of what I would have been confessing was my own failure. The silence in the room was the worst kind. The kind that wasn't empty but full, packed with everything. 2 people weren't saying. Roman looked at the file on the laptop screen. He looked at Dex's face. He looked at the floor. He breathed once, slowly, the breath of a man managing something enormous with something inadequate. You should have told me, he said. Yes. That's the 2nd time tonight someone who works for me has said that. I know you understand that when this is done, you and I are going to have a conversation about what your role in this organization means going forward. Yes, Dex said, I understand. Roman nodded. Find Forel. Use everything, the transponder history, the financial freeze, the communications intercepts. He switched vehicles at Elgin. which means he's using a secondary identity. Pull every alias, cross-referenced with accounts in the frozen network. He planned this exit, which means there's a route. Find the route. Dex took the laptop and left. Alara and Roman were alone in the room. She'd been standing near the wall this entire time. She hadn't moved, because moving had seemed like the wrong thing to do. This was not a room where her movement was the important variable. She'd learned in 7 years of trauma nursing that sometimes the most useful thing a person could do was occupy space without complicating it. But Roman looked at her now, and there was something in the look that was different from every other time he'd looked at her tonight. "You should go," he said. "I can have someone drive you home. Nico's not awake yet. Senna will manage his recovery." "I know Sina will manage his recovery. I'm waiting until he's awake." She met his eyes. "That's not negotiable." Something moved in his face. Alara, Roman, a pause. He almost said something. She could see the shape of it, the beginning of an argument, that he was deciding wasn't worth the effort, or possibly or possibly deciding she would win, or possibly that he was too tired to determine which of those things was true. 14 people, she said. "Yes. Forel was in your organization for 4 years, actively working against you for at least 2. The people who died." She stopped, started again. "The people who died, were they all in your operations, or were any of them?" "All of them were mine." His voice was flat. "They were in this organization because I asked them to be. They trusted the security of the information I told them was protected." He looked at his hands. Forel was responsible for that protection. She thought about Gerald Watts in the cardiac ICU. The decision she'd made in a hallway, fast, against protocol, with 3 people watching, and Pruitt's career threat implicit in every second she spent doing it. She thought about what it felt like to know, with certainty, that you were the last line between a person and something irreversible. "This wasn't your failure," she said. He looked at her. "Being betrayed isn't a failure. It's a wound." She held his gaze. "What you do with it is what matters. You sound like a nurse." "I am a nurse. You sound like one right now." He stood. Which is not a criticism. He moved to the door. He stopped there, hand on the frame, back to her. You could see the set of his shoulders, the specific tension of a person holding weight and knowing it and making the choice not to set it down. Forel knew about the facility, he said. He knew before tonight. He's been sitting on that information, using it as leverage with the consortium, letting them decide when to move, which means the attack tonight wasn't their first option. He turned slightly, not all the way, just enough. They tried something else first, something that failed. She waited. 3 weeks ago, Nico was in a car accident, Roman said. Truck ran a red light on Michigan Avenue and T-boned the vehicle Nico was in. We wrote it off as road negligence. The driver of the truck was never located. He looked at her over his shoulder. It wasn't an accident. The cold came back. The specific nausea. They tried to kill him 3 weeks ago. Yes. And Nico knew about Forel 3 weeks ago. He said 6 weeks. He found the pattern in the wire transfers 6 weeks ago. But 3 weeks ago, someone tried to kill him. Roman's jaw was tight, which means Forel knew that Nico was looking, which means Forel had access to information about Nico's investigation. Means. He stopped. She finished it. Someone else was watching Nico. Someone who knew what he was doing and told Forel. Someone inside the organization who isn't Forel. Roman turned fully. His face was the face of a man, arriving at an answer he'd been circling for the last hour, an answer he hadn't wanted to reach, because reaching it meant the damage was not 1 betrayal but 2. "The man on the floor," Alara said. He said Forel told the team that Nico was already dead. Before the attack, he knew Nico's status in real time, which means he had a source inside this facility who was reporting to him live. Yes. Who was in this facility tonight? Besides your people and me. Roman said nothing, but she watched his face move through a series of realizations, each one landing like a blow that he absorbed standing, because sitting was no longer an option, and she watched him arrive at a name. She didn't know the name. She didn't need to. She could see it in the way his eyes went still, the way his mouth compressed, the way he looked suddenly like a man who had been shot and was waiting to see if the wound was the kind you survived. He moved back through the door without another word. She heard him in the corridor, heard his footsteps, fast, heading toward the recovery area, heard a door open. Heard voices, Roman's, low and fast, and then another voice, one she recognized. Marcus, the scrub tech, the one who'd set up the instrument tray with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done it many times before in this facility, who'd been in this facility before, who had access to the layout, the security system, the communication lines. She heard Roman say Marcus's name with a specific inflection that required no explanation. She heard the silence that followed. She went to the doorway. Marcus was standing against the wall of the recovery area with Roman in front of him, and two of Roman's men flanking him, and his face had the face of a person whose math had just run out. Not afraid, exactly beyond afraid. In the territory past it where everything simplified down to the next 5 seconds. And what happened in them? How long? Roman said. Marcus didn't answer her. How long have you been reporting to Forel? Nothing. Marcus. Roman's voice had the quality of a surface under which something was moving. Trained you. I built this facility for you to work in. I paid for your mother's surgery 2 years ago because you asked me and I did not hesitate. A pause. How long? Marcus looked at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was the voice of a person who had prepared for this moment and found that the preparation was insufficient. 8 months. Roman went very still. He approached me after the surgery, Marcus said. He told me you were planning to close the facility, that you were going to replace the whole medical team. He said I was going to lose everything, and that the only person who could protect my position was him. His jaw worked. I didn't know people would die. I was reporting access logs, schedules. I didn't know what he was using it for. You knew who he was. I needed the work. You knew who I was. Roman's voice had not moved from its register. You knew what information like that could be used for. Marcus's eyes came up. They were red-rimmed. Are you going to kill me? Roman looked at him for a long time. Ilara, from the doorway, could not see Roman's face, only Marcus's. And Marcus was doing a thing she recognized from the ER, which was the thing people did when they had arrived at the place they'd been most afraid of, and found that the fear was both exactly as bad as they'd imagined, and also, somehow, survivable. No, Roman said. You're going to help me find Forel, and then we're going to discuss what the rest of your life looks like from here. He turned away from Marcus, and his eyes found Ilara in the doorway. She didn't move. She held his gaze. He looked like a man who had built something over many years and walked into the room tonight to find that the structure was still standing, but the foundation had been excavated, quietly, by people who had been inside it. He looked like a man who was doing the arithmetic of what was left, and finding that the number was smaller than he'd thought, but larger than nothing. He looked like a man who was deciding, right now, what kind of person he was going to be in the morning. She understood that feeling completely. From the recovery room behind him, a monitor beeped steady, even, the sound of Nico's heart doing its job. She said, he's going to wake up soon. Let me be there when he does. Roman stepped aside. She walked past him into the recovery room, and she sat beside Nico's bed, and she put her hand near his wrist, not touching, just near, the way nurses did when they needed a patient to know, even in sedation, that someone was present, and she waited. The facility hummed around her. Somewhere in it, Roman was rebuilding his understanding of everything he thought he knew. And she was sitting with a man who had nearly died for a secret, in a room she'd never planned to be in, having become someone she hadn't planned to become, and the morning was still hours away, but it was coming, and it was going to require her to be ready for whatever it brought with it. She was ready. She didn't know when that had happened, but she was. Nico opened his eyes at 4:47 in the morning. Not dramatically, not the gasp and surge of television resuscitations. He came back the way most people came back from anesthesia, which was slowly and without grace, his eyelids working against the light in small increments, his mouth dry, his first coherent sound a rough exhale that was more complaint than anything else. Ilara was there. Hey, she said. He looked at her. Took him a moment to place her. She could see the sequence of it, the anesthesia fog, thinning in real time, and then something settled in his face. You're still here, I said I would be. Nurses usually don't. He stopped, swallowed. His throat was raw from the intubation tube. Usually don't stay. I'm not usually a nurse in a situation like this. She poured water from the carafe on the bedside table, tilted the straw toward him. He drank. She watched his color, watched his eyes, watched the monitor, with the peripheral attention of someone who had spent the night calibrating to its rhythms. Everything was where it should be. How's the pain? Present. He looked at the ceiling. Roman? Here. Roman was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come back. He moved quietly for a large man, or she was more tired than she knew. He crossed to the other side of the bed and stood there, and the two brothers looked at each other with the specific look of people who had said everything they needed to say in the room before surgery, and were now simply confirming that the other one was real and present and alive. Nico, said Marcus. Handled, Roman said. Forel? Pause. Not yet. Nico's jaw tightened. The drive. In my apartment. I know about the drive. Dex is moving on it now. Roman's voice was flat and controlled, and underneath it was something that Nico could read. And Alara was learning to read the sound of a man operating on pure will because everything else had been spent. You focus on being vertical. Let me handle Forel. He's going to run. If he hasn't already. He tried to move money and couldn't. His vehicle is gone, but his financial network is frozen, and Marcus is going through the communication logs right now. We'll find the route. He put his hand on the bed rail, not on Nico, just near him, the same way Alara positioned her hand. Nico. Stop. Nico stopped. He looked at the ceiling again. His eyes were wet, and he blinked it back with the efficiency of someone who had decided that this was not the moment. I should have told you about Forel the day I found the first transfer. Yes. I thought I was protecting you, I know. I was wrong. Roman said nothing for a moment. Then you've been wrong before. So have I. We can discuss the extensive list of our respective failures when you're not 2 hours out of vascular surgery. Something moved in his voice, brief, controlled. Alive, that's where we start. Nico looked at him. Whatever passed between them in that look was not for Alara, and she didn't try to read it. She checked the monitor, adjusted the blanket, made a note on the chart, doctor. Senna had started. She gave them the privacy of her professional focus. Nico said the nurse. Roman said, I know. She shot someone. I know that too, for me. Roman looked at Alara. She was writing numbers and not looking back. Yes, he said. For you. She heard Nico exhale a long breath, the kind that had been held for hours. Okay, he said. Okay, she didn't ask what the okay meant. She filed it. Dex came in at 5:22 with his laptop, and a look that meant he'd found something. He set the laptop on the small desk in the recovery room and pulled up a map of the greater Chicago metropolitan area, with a series of plotted points connected by a route that moved northwest in a pattern that wasn't random. Marcus gave us the secondary vehicle, Dex said. Forel planned 3 vehicle switches for this exit. We knew about the first 2 standard protocol. The third is the one that mattered. He pointed at a point on the map, a small town about 60 miles northwest of the city. He has a property here, not registered to him. It's registered to a shell company that took us until 40 minutes ago to trace back to a financial structure Forel built 8 years ago, before he ever came to work for us. He looked at Roman. He built the exit before he built the position. He planned this from before he walked into our organization. The room was very quiet. He was always a consortium operative, Roman said. Yes, everything he did with us, every 4 years of it, was constructed to position him for access to our financial networks and facility locations. He is not a man who was turned. He is a man who came in already turned. Dex closed the laptop, which changes the timeline, which changes everything about what information the consortium has had access to. Roman looked at the closed laptop for a long moment. Then he looked at Alara. She didn't know why he looked at her in moments like this. Maybe because she was the one person in the room with no stake in the organizational implications, which meant she was the one person who would say what she actually thought. You need to go tonight, she said. If he makes the 3rd vehicle switch and gets to wherever he's going next, he's gone. Yes. How many men do you have who are operational right now? Roman thought. 4 are reliable. 2 more who are capable, but 4, she said. Go with 4. He looked at her. You're wasting time, she said. He moved. She didn't watch them leave. She heard it, the controlled efficiency of men who were tired but functional, gearing up in the corridor, the low rapid exchange of logistics between Roman and Dex, the sound of vehicles above as the Suburbans pulled out of the underground parking. She sat with Nico, and she listened, and she counted, because counting was what she did when she was afraid, and she was afraid. Not for herself. That ship had sailed somewhere around the 3rd hour of the night, when she'd first understood that her fear had a different shape than she'd expected, not the fear of what would happen to her, but the fear of failing the person on the table. Now the person on the table was breathing steadily, and his color was good, and his monitor was singing its even rhythm, and the fear she had was for a man in a black SUV driving 60 miles into the dark after a person who had spent years building a trap. She made herself stop thinking about it. "You're worried about him," Nico said. She looked at him. He was watching her with the particular clarity of someone who was too exhausted to perform normalcy, and had settled into just saying what he observed. "I'm monitoring your recovery," she said. "You've checked the monitor 4 times in the last 6 minutes. My recovery is fine. You're worried about Roman." She didn't answer. "That's not a bad thing," Nico said. "He doesn't have people who worry about him. Not really. People fear him, or they need him, or they owe him. Worry is different." He shifted against the pillow with a small, controlled wince. "You should tell him that. Tell him that people worry about him. Tell him that you do." She looked at him with the look she used on patients who were overextending themselves. "You just had vascular surgery. Stop doing this. I almost died tonight. I'm allowed to be philosophical. You're allowed to rest." "Alara." He waited until she looked at him. "He's going to come back, and he's going to offer you money and a car and a very polite goodbye, because that's what he does. He solves debts. He clears accounts. He makes sure everything is settled, because unsettled things are dangerous in his world." His eyes were tired and direct and entirely serious. "Don't let him settle you." She held his gaze. "Sleep, Nico." Closed his eyes. She sat with her hands in her lap, and the monitor beeping, and the facility humming, and Chicago somewhere above them, beginning its slow gray turn toward morning. And she thought about what he'd said, and then she made herself stop thinking about it because it was not useful, and she was tired. And there was nothing she could do about any of it until Roman came back. If Roman came back, she checked the monitor. Everything was fine. She counted. 61 miles northwest. The third vehicle, a gray panel van registered to a landscaping company that did not exist, was parked behind a property that looked, from the county road, like an unremarkable lake house. 2 stories wood siding, weathered to the color of old pewter, a dock that extended 20 feet over water, that was black and still in the pre-dawn hour. No lights in the windows. Roman's vehicles came off the county road without headlights. He'd killed them 3 miles back, navigating by GPS, and the faint gray of a sky that was thinking about becoming morning, but hadn't committed yet. Dex drove. The second vehicle followed at the same distance. Same darkness, the 2 SUVs moving in the kind of coordinated silence that looked, from a distance, like nothing at all. They stopped at the tree line, 200 yards from the house. Roman got out. He could feel the cold through his jacket, proper cold, away from the city's retained heat, the kind that found the gaps in everything. His arm was throbbing under the dressing Alara had put on it. He'd stopped noticing it sometime around the 4th hour in the facility, and it had come back, now that the adrenaline was cycling down. A steady, specific pain that told him the graze was more significant than he'd wanted it to be at the time. He didn't acknowledge it. Dex was beside him, earpiece in, the other team in position at the dock side of the house. They had a rough interior layout from the property records. 2 floors, 4 rooms on the main level, staircase on the north wall. Standard rural construction. Nothing fortified. Forel would know they were coming. He would know because he was Cassian Forel, and Cassian Forel had spent 4 years demonstrating a quality of operational intelligence that Roman now understood was not natural talent, but rather 4 years of comprehensive access to Roman's own systems. He would know, and he would have a contingency, and the contingency would be the thing that mattered. "He's inside," Dex said. His voice was barely audible, his breath visible in the cold air. He was looking at the small thermal scope in his hand. 1 heat signature, main level north room. No movement. "He's waiting." Yes. Roman studied the house. He studied the dock, the water, the position of the vent behind the house. He studied the way the tree line ran and the angles it created, and the places where a person who had decided the exit was necessary could move fast and make it to the water before anyone closed the distance. He's not planning to negotiate, Roman said no. He's planning to wait until we're inside the structure and then go through the back. Dex lowered the scope. If he makes the dock, there's a boat. We didn't see it from the road, but the property records show a boathouse on the east side. If he gets to the water, he won't. Roman turned to him. Take 2 men to the boathouse. I want it sealed before we go through the front door. Give me 4 minutes. Dex looked at him. You're going in with 1 man. I'm going in with 1 man. Roman, 4 minutes, Dex. Dex went. Roman stood in the tree line for 4 minutes. He used them the way he used silence, not as absence but as material, something to shape into whatever he needed next. He needed to be clear. He needed to be precise. He needed to go through that door with nothing in him, except the intention of coming out the other side with Cassian Farrell, alive and in possession of every piece of information he had not yet surrendered. He thought about 14 people. He used that too. At 4 minutes exactly, he moved. The front door was unlocked. That was the first thing that was wrong. Not the lock itself, the specific lack of resistance that meant the lock had been left open deliberately. An invitation or a statement. A door held open by a man who had decided that the performance of security was no longer worth the effort. The second thing that was wrong was the light. A single lamp in the north room, warm, low. The kind of light that a person chose when they were done running and had sat down to wait for whatever was coming. Roman moved through the door, with his man a compact, experienced operative named Garrett, who had been with him for 6 years and who moved like water, finding the path of least resistance through any space, and they cleared the entry. The kitchen, the main corridor, in 30 seconds, and then Roman stepped into the north room. Cassian Farrell was sitting in a chair. He was 53 years old, and he looked, at this moment, every year of it not broken, not collapsed, but expended, the way a battery looked when it had nothing left. He was wearing a wool coat, a travel bag at his feet, a glass of something amber on the table beside him. He had his hands visible, resting on his knees, and he looked at Roman when Roman walked in with the look of a man who had been expecting exactly this face, and had spent the last hour deciding what to do with his own. You found the shell company, Farrell said. Marcus, Roman said. You underestimated him. Farrell absorbed that. I underestimated several things. His voice was the same voice Roman had heard in 200 meetings, smooth, intelligent, precisely calibrated. It had not changed. That was the thing that landed hardest. The voice was completely familiar, and the man using it was not. Sit down, Roman. No. I'd like to tell you, I don't want your explanation. Roman came further into the room. Garrett held the doorway. I want the Veld Consortium's current operational structure. Names, locations, financial channels. Everything you sold them about my organization, I want its equivalent about theirs. And I want the Meridian account documentation. The original transfers, not the cleaned copies. Farrell looked at him for a long moment. You want to go after the consortium? Yes. That's not a retrieval operation. That's a war. I'm aware of what it is. Roman. For the first time, something moved in Farrell's voice, not regret, but something adjacent to it, the tone of a person who had anticipated this moment, and found that the anticipation had not adequately prepared them for the reality. I did not come to you as an enemy. I came to you as an operative with a specific objective. Every decision I made was operational, not personal. 14 people, Roman said. Farrell's jaw tightened. Casualties they had names. Roman's voice had not moved. Not one register. I know all 14 names. I know the name of the first one, who was 26 years old and had a daughter he'd never met. I know the name of the last one, who found out about the Amsterdam failure from a phone call and was dead inside 3 hours. I know every name between them. He was 6 feet from Farrell's chair. So do not tell me they were casualties of an operation. The room was very quiet. Farrell looked at his hands on his knees. The documentation you want is in a cloud archive. I'll give you the access credentials. All of it, including your handler at the consortium, including every contact you've made in the last 4 years on their behalf. A pause, longer than the others. This was the pause, Roman understood, of a man calculating whether the thing he was about to do was survivable, and deciding that the calculation itself was no longer the point. including my handler, Farrell said. Roman looked at him for a long moment. He was waiting for the thing he'd been waiting for since he walked through the door, the contingency, the backup, the exit that Farrell had certainly prepared, because Farrell prepared everything. The unlocked door was an invitation, and invitations from men like Farrell were never simple. He heard it, a sound from above, the second floor, a weight shifting, not Garrett, not anyone Roman had brought, a sound from the wrong direction. He moved, not at Farrell, sideways, taking himself out of the line from the staircase in one fast lateral step, and he was already turning toward the north wall when the figure came off the stairs. Not fast, not a trained operative. The movement was wrong for that. Too upright, too exposed. A man in a heavy jacket with a weapon up, and the specific wide-eyed expression of someone who had been waiting for a signal that had not come and had decided to act without it. Farrell's contingency, a backup. Someone the consortium had positioned here independently of Farrell's exit plan, which meant the consortium didn't fully trust Farrell's exit plan, which meant they didn't fully trust Farrell. Garrett moved at the same time Roman did. The shot went wide. The backup had not accounted for the room's furniture, had not accounted for Garrett's speed, had not accounted for the way Roman moved in spaces like this, with a fluency that was physical memory. The round hit the window frame. Glass cracked but held. Garrett covered the distance in 3 steps, and the backup went down hard, the weapon sliding under the table, and the whole thing took less than 4 seconds and produced a silence afterward that was enormous. Farrell sat in his chair. His hands were still on his knees. Face had lost something, a layer, a surface, the controlled professional composure that had been his primary feature for 4 years. Underneath it was a man who had just watched his exit point get taken apart and who understood, now, in the specific way you understood things, when the last option disappeared, that there was no version of this morning where he walked out of this room independently. They were going to take me, Farrell said, after you arrived. They were going to let you come in and then take us both. Roman looked at him. The consortium doesn't leave assets in the field when they're burned, Farrell said. I knew that. I've always known that. I thought I had more time. I thought he stopped. He picked up the glass beside him and then put it back down without drinking. I thought I mattered more to them than I apparently do. Everyone thinks that, Roman said. Farrell looked up. Every person who builds something for an organization they don't control thinks they're indispensable. They're never indispensable. They're useful until they're not. Roman crouched in front of him, the same position he'd used with the man on the floor of the facility. The position of a person who wanted to be at eye level, who wanted to make sure the other person understood that they were being seen completely. You know what that feels like now. Farrell said nothing. Give me the archive credentials, Roman said. Give me everything. And then we're going to have a very long conversation about how you're going to help me dismantle the organization you spent 4 years working for, because you are currently the most valuable asset I have, and I will use that completely and without apology. He waited, and when it's done, the question of what happens to you afterward is one I haven't decided yet. But the question of what happens to you right now depends entirely on what you do in the next 30 seconds. Farrell reached into his coat. Garrett went rigid. Farrell produced a phone. Just a phone, a secondary handset, burner style, already unlocked. He held it out. The archive is already open. I opened it when I heard your vehicles. He met Roman's eyes. I was going to give it to you. I came here to give it to you. Consortium thought I was running. I was waiting. Roman took the phone. He looked at the screen. The archive was there, a file structure he could see, even at a glance, was extensive, layered, comprehensive. Years of documentation, operational records, financial channels, handler communications with names and account numbers, and a level of detail that made the scope of what Farrell had given the consortium visible all at once, like a wound seen under proper light for the first time. And something else, a second folder. Not labeled the same way as the others, not operational shorthand, but a plain name, 2 words. Roman's name. He looked at Farrell. What is this? Open it, Farrell said. Roman opened it. The folder contained a single document. Contract, not a financial contract, not an operational brief. Contract between the Veld Consortium and a name Roman did not recognize. Dated 14 months ago, with an objective laid out in the precise, bloodless language that organizations, consortiums like the consortium used when they were commissioning something that required that language to be survivable. The objective was Roman's death, not Nico's. Roman's. Nico had been a secondary target, a way of removing the person who was closest to discovering Forel, of cutting the information chain before it reached the man who would act on it. Nico was a step. Roman was the destination. The contract had a completion date, 72 hours from now. Roman stood up. The room felt different. Not physically everything was exactly where it had been 30 seconds ago, but different in the way a room felt when the information in it changed, the meaning of everything you'd understood about it. The attack on the facility tonight was not the consortium's primary operation. It was a diversion, a disruption, something designed to cost Roman time and resources and people and attention, while the primary operation, the one with a name on it, a date, a contract moved into position. Who is this? He held the phone toward Forel. The name on the contract. Contractor, Forel said. Not one of ours. External. Specializes in a pause, in targets who are otherwise difficult to reach. He's already been activated. Yes. 14 months ago. He's been in position for where? Forel looked at him. I don't know his location. That's not information consortium operatives receive. Firewall. If we were taken, we couldn't compromise him. He held Roman's gaze. But the completion date is the date. He moves on that date, regardless of whether the support operation succeeded. The facility attack tonight was support. Whether it succeeded or not doesn't change the contract. 72 hours. Roman looked at the phone. He looked at Forel. He looked at Garrett, who had heard everything and whose face was doing the thing faces did when the scope of a problem expanded past its previous perimeter. He looked at the window. Outside, the sky was doing its slow gray turn. Somewhere in that gray 60 miles south, a woman was sitting in a recovery room beside his brother, counting down to a morning that was going to be more complicated than she knew. He looked back at the phone. 72 hours was not long. 72 hours with a contractor already in position and a consortium that had just watched its support operation fail was a specific kind of mathematics, and Roman was very good at mathematics, and the answer was not comfortable. He made 3 decisions in the space of a single breath. The first was that Forel was coming with him. The second was that the consortium's financial network was going to be inside Roman's systems by morning, because Forel was going to open every door and Roman was going to walk through all of them. And by the time the contractor's 72 hours elapsed, there was going to be nothing left of the consortium's operational structure that could support or pay for what the contract called for. The third decision was about Alara. She was in the facility. It was visible. Anyone who had been watching the night's events knew she was there, knew what she'd done, knew that Roman had brought her in and kept her close. Visibility in Roman's world was its own kind of targeting. He had spent the night thinking of her as a variable he needed to manage, and a resource he needed to protect, and both of those framings were inadequate, and he knew it, and he was done pretending otherwise. He said, Garrett, get him to the vehicle. Garrett got Forel to the vehicle. Roman stood in the empty north room for a moment, with the phone in his hand, and the lamp burning its warm, low light, and the broken window letting in a thread of cold air that smelled like the lake and the coming morning. He called Dex. Boathouse is clear, Dex said. We have Forel? We have Forel. I need you to run a name. He read the name from the contract. Consortium external contractor. I need everything that exists on this person in the next 2 hours. Location, method, current position, everything. A pause. Is this the primary? Yes. Another pause, shorter. Understood. What's the timeline? 72 hours, Roman said. Less now. He pocketed the phone. He looked at the lamp. He looked at the window. He walked out of the house into the cold gray of the pre-morning, where his vehicles were waiting, and Forel was already secured, and Dex was already working. And the last stretch of night before the day that was coming felt in the specific way that the worst stretches always felt, like a distance that had to be covered, regardless of what it cost to cover it. He got into the vehicle. Drive, he said. And 60 miles south, in a facility beneath a city that was beginning its slow, gray morning, a monitor beeped its steady rhythm, and a woman sat beside a bed counting and did not yet know that the contract with her name was not in the folder, because her name was not in the folder yet, but that the man who had just read the folder understood, with the clarity of a person who had spent a lifetime calculating threats, exactly how quickly that could change. Roman came back at 6:14 in the morning. Alara heard the vehicles, first the low, controlled sound of engines beneath the building, the freight elevator engaging, the specific sequence of sounds that meant the people she'd been counting toward were back. She'd been awake the entire time. She hadn't tried to sleep. She'd sat with Nico, who had drifted in and out of a light medicated rest. She'd monitored his numbers and updated the chart and drunk 2 cups of coffee from the facility's small kitchen that tasted like it had been brewed sometime before the attack and reheated twice. And she had counted. She heard Roman's footsteps in the corridor. She knew them by now, the specific rhythm and weight of them, the way they covered ground without urgency, but without hesitation either. He came through the recovery room door and stopped. He looked at her, then at Nico, then at the monitor. He ran the same assessment she'd been running all night, and she watched him do it, and she watched the result land in his face. Nico's color was better. The numbers were stable. The surgical repair was holding. His brother was going to be all right. Something in Roman's shoulders moved, just slightly. The specific release of a tension that had been structural load-bearing and was now no longer needed. "Forel," she said, secured. He came into the room and sat in the chair she'd vacated, the one beside the bed. Not her chair, just the chair. He sat in it like a man whose body had finally submitted an invoice for the night, and he was in the process of reviewing the total. He gave us everything. The consortium's operational structure, the financial channels, the handler contacts, all of it, and the contractor. He looked at her. She watched him calculate what she knew and how she knew it. "Nico talks in his sleep," she said. Not clearly, but enough. She held his gaze. "You found a contract, with a deadline, and it isn't for Nico." Roman was quiet for a moment. "No, it isn't." "When?" "Dex has the contractor's identity. We're working on location." He looked at his hands. They were clean, he'd washed somewhere, or the night had simply been dry enough that what she'd expected wasn't visible. 48 hours, maybe less. "For you." "Yes." She let that sit. She looked at Nico's monitor, watched the line trace its even peaks, gave herself the 4 seconds of looking at something clinical and reliable before she looked back at Roman. "What does Dex need to find him?" "He has what he needs. It's a matter of time, and what does Dex need that he doesn't have?" Roman looked at her with the look she'd come to recognize as his recalibration, the one where he was updating his model of her in real time. "Forel gave us a communication protocol the contractor uses to confirm operational status. Coded exchange. The consortium sends a check-in signal every 24 hours. If the contractor doesn't respond within a specific window, the protocol changes and we lose the thread." "When is the next check-in?" 4 hours and 11 minutes. So Dex needs to intercept it and respond in a way that keeps the thread open. And to do that, he needs the response key, which Forel claims to not have because of the firewall. But Forel built the protocol, Alara said, or had access to it being built, which means somewhere in the archive he gave you, there's a structure that generated the response key, even if he didn't store the key itself. She paused. "I don't know anything about encryption or communication protocols, but I know how medical documentation works. Which is, you always leave a trail you didn't mean to leave. You always store the thing you think you don't need, because getting rid of information completely requires a discipline that most people don't actually have." Roman looked at her for a long moment. "Tell Dex to search the archive for any file created or modified within 48 hours of the protocol's implementation date," she said. "That's when people make the mistakes. Right at the beginning, when they're still building and they haven't started being careful yet." He took out his phone. He sent a message. He put the phone back in his pocket. He looked at Nico. "He told me not to let you settle the account," Alara said. Roman turned. "What?" "Nico. Last night, before you came back from wherever you were in your head, he said you solved debts. That you'd come back and offer money and a polite goodbye, because that's what you do with things that are resolved." She kept her voice even. "Told me not to let you do that." A long pause. He said that. Roman leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling. He looked like a man who was tired in a way that sleep was not going to fully address the tiredness of someone who had been running on the knowledge that everything was worse than he thought and had now confirmed it, and was on the other side of confirmation, which was not relief, but something rawer than relief. I was going to offer you 50,000, he said. I know. Instead of 20, because of what happened with the weapon, staying through the night, and I know what it was for. And you're going to tell me that's not what you want. She looked at him. I'm going to tell you that money isn't the thing that needs addressing right now. Contractor is the thing that needs addressing. Everything else can wait until you're not 48 hours from a completion date. He looked at her, then really looked. The way he'd looked at her in the moments throughout the night when she'd said something that landed differently than he expected. You're not afraid. I'm very afraid. I've been afraid since the moment 5 black SUVs surrounded me on an industrial street in the rain. She held his gaze. Being afraid and being functional aren't mutually exclusive. That's the first thing you learn in trauma nursing. His phone moved. He looked at it. Something in his face shifted the shift of a person receiving information that changes the next move. Dex found it, he said. The response key, a draft file, created 2 days before the protocol went live. 4L was testing the key generator, and he saved a draft he forgot to delete. He stood. 48 hours just became something I can work with. He moved toward the door. Roman, he stopped. She stood up from the chair. She was aware of how she looked scrubs from the previous day, hair pulled back in something that had been a ponytail 8 hours ago, and was now more of a statement of intent, shadows under her eyes that she could feel more than see. She was aware of all of it, and she didn't care about any of it. When this is done, she said, when the contractor is handled, and the consortium's network is dismantled, and Nico can walk out of here on his own, then we talk. About what comes next. Not about money. About what comes next. Roman looked at her. His face was doing the thing it did when he was managing something. He hadn't anticipated the slight tension at the jaw, the careful stillness. That's a conversation I don't usually have. I know. Have it anyway. She sat back down. Go find your contractor. He went. Dex ran the intercept clean. The response key worked. Check-in signal came in at 10:22 in the morning, and Dex replied within the window, using the key from Pharrell's forgotten draft file, and the thread stayed open. And on the other end of that thread was a location not precise, not a street address, but a cell tower ping and a communication pattern that Dex's technical team triangulated over the following 6 hours into a radius that was manageable. Contractor was in Chicago. He hadn't left. The facility attack, the failure of the support operation, the freeze on the consortium's financial channels, none of it had triggered his withdrawal protocol because his contract was not contingent on support. His contract was contingent on the date, and the date was still coming. Roman got the location at 4:47 in the afternoon. He went with Dex and 2 men he trusted with a completeness that the night had tested and confirmed. He did not take Garrett, who needed rest. He did not explain to Alara where he was going, because she was asleep, finally, genuinely asleep in the chair beside Nico's bed, her head tilted against the wall and her hands in her lap. And he stood in the doorway of the recovery room for exactly 12 seconds and looked at her, and then he left without waking her. The contractor was using a hotel on the near north side under a name that was clean enough to pass a standard check and shallow enough to collapse under the kind of scrutiny Roman's people applied. Room 614. 6 floors up. Corner room. The kind of room that a person who needed sight lines and exit options chose. Roman went through the hotel's service entrance. He went up the stairs. He did not think about the 14 people. He'd already done that thinking. He did not think about 4L in the secured location where he was currently being held, or about Marcus, or about Dex's expression when he'd admitted to knowing about the anomalies and saying nothing. He did not think about any of the things that were waiting for him on the other side of the next hour. He thought about 6 flights of stairs and a door at the top and what was behind it. He knocked. The pause on the other side was the pause of a professional, not the pause of someone surprised, but the pause of someone running through options in the 2 seconds before committing to one. The door opened. The contractor, was a man in his late 40s, lean with the specific physical economy of someone who had spent decades making themselves difficult to read. He looked at Roman. He looked at Dex. He looked at the two men in the corridor, and he ran the same math that Alara had run in the rain the previous night, the math of a person assessing whether the situation was retrievable, and arrived at the same answer. "How did you find the key?" he said. Not a question. Statement from a person who needed to understand the operational failure. "Someone forgot to delete a draft," Roman said. The contractor almost smiled. 4L. Yes. He always was sentimental about his process. He stepped back from the door. "Come in. I'd rather do this in a room than in a hallway." They went in. What happened in room 614 over the following 40 minutes was not a fight. It was a negotiation of the kind that only happened when every party in the room understood that the usual leverage had been removed, and what remained was the bare structure of what each person actually wanted and what they were willing to give for it. Contractor wanted to live. He was honest about this in a way that was almost refreshing. No performance, no bravado. The straightforward acknowledgement of a professional who had assessed the situation and identified survival as the primary objective. Roman wanted the consortium's remaining operational nodes. The ones that Forel's archive documented couldn't archive document but couldn't locate the physical infrastructure, the people, the channels that the consortium would use to reconstitute itself if its financial network was dismantled. Contractor had that information. He had it because he was the consortium's most trusted external asset, and trusted assets received access in exchange for reliability. They made an agreement. It was not a comfortable agreement. It was the kind of agreement that two people made when the alternative was worse for both of them, and both of them were clear-eyed enough to recognize that. Roman did not like making it. He made it anyway, because he had learned a long time ago that the decisions that mattered were not the ones that were easy to make, but the ones you made after you'd removed everything comfortable from the options. He came back to the facility at 7:39 in the evening. Nico was awake. He was sitting up not fully, not comfortably, but with the specific determination of a man who had decided that lying flat was no longer acceptable. He had color in his face, and his eyes were clear, and he was eating something from a bowl that he was clearly tolerating rather than enjoying. And he looked up when Roman walked in with an expression that covered relief with attitude so effectively that only someone who knew him well would catch the relief underneath. "You look terrible," Nico said. "Thank you. Is it done?" "Contractor is handled. The consortium's remaining nodes are being addressed. Forel's archive is in the hands of people who know what to do with it." Roman sat in the chair that had been Alara's. He sat in it, and it was still warm. "Done." Nico ate a spoonful of whatever was in the bowl. "And Alara?" Roman looked at the door. "Where is she?" "She went to wash up. Dr. Senna gave her scrubs from the supply locker." Nico paused. "She's been awake since you left. She said she'd slept enough." She was lying. "I know, Roman. I know, Nico. Do you? Because you have a very specific way of knowing things and then doing nothing about them. Because the knowing feels sufficient." Roman looked at his brother. Nico looked back at him with the face of a person who had been shot, had surgery, had spent a night being kept alive by someone he'd met 6 hours before the surgery, and had arrived on the other side of all of it, with a clarity that near death sometimes produced, and that was both useful and occasionally insufferable. "Eat your food," Roman said. "It's terrible food, keeping you alive. So is she." Nico put the bowl on the table beside him. "I know you know that. I know. You're going to offer her money and a position, a very reasonable arrangement that gives her everything except the thing she actually." "Nico, I'm almost died last night. I'm allowed. You already used that. I'm going to keep using it for at least a week." But his voice had shifted, the edge dropped out, and what was underneath was quieter and more honest and more his brother's actual voice. "She held this. She held the whole night. She didn't have to. She didn't have a reason to. She was fired. She was broke. She was standing in the rain when we found her. And everything in her life had just gone wrong. And she came into this facility and she held it." He looked at Roman steadily. "That's not a person you settle an account with." Roman said nothing. "That's a person you don't let walk away without saying the true thing," Nico said. "Whatever the true thing is." Alara came back 10 minutes later. She was in clean scrubs navy, slightly too large, the sleeves pushed up. She'd washed her face and put her hair back properly, despite everything, and she looked, despite everything, like a person who had decided to be functional and was executing on that decision. She stopped when she saw Roman. "You're back," she said. "Yes." She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him all night, the clinical assessment that wasn't entirely clinical, the read that she did automatically, and that she'd stopped trying to conceal around hour 3. She looked at him, and she read him, and she said, "It's done." "Yes." She nodded. She went to Nico's monitor and checked it out of pure reflex, made a small adjustment that Dr. Sina would have made if she'd been in the room, wrote a number on the chart. Then she stood with the chart in her hands and looked at it for a moment without reading it. "I need to call someone about my car," she said. "The alternator. I've been putting it off." "I'll have it handled," Roman said. "I wasn't asking you to—" "I know, I'll have it handled." He stood. He looked at her. The distance between them was about 6 feet, the same distance it had been on the industrial street in the rain, when she'd said, "I'm the nurse," and everything that had followed from it. "Lara." She put the chart down. She looked at him. "I'm going to offer you something," he said, "and I want you to hear it completely before you decide what it is." She waited. "The facility needs a medical director," he said. "Not a nominal title, an operational role. Full authority over patient care decisions, staffing, supply procurement, and treatment protocols. The facility is independent of my organization's operations. It exists separately. It's funded separately, and the person running it answers to no one in my structure on medical matters." He held her gaze. "Full salary, staff of your choosing, and a contract that gives you the authority to terminate the arrangement at any time, for any reason, with 30 days' notice." Alara was quiet. "It's a real position," he said. "It's not a way of keeping you close. It's not a favor or a debt settlement. It's a job that needs doing, and you're the person who demonstrated last night that you can do it. In a facility that exists to treat people who can't go to hospitals," she said. "Yes, people in your world. People who need care they can't access through conventional means. Some of them are in my world. Some of them are simply people who, for various reasons, cannot walk into an emergency room." He paused. "You treated a man last night who had been sent to kill my brother. You dressed his wound. He needed it dressed. I know. That's why I'm asking you." He said the next part carefully, because he'd thought about how to say it for the past 3 hours. "You lost your job for refusing to let a man die in a waiting room because the paperwork wasn't in order. Principle that cost you your career at St. Jude's is the same principle that kept Nico alive last night. I'm offering you a position where that principle is not a liability." The job description. The room was quiet. Nico was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a person pretending not to listen. Alara looked at Roman for a long time. He held it, didn't look away, didn't qualify, didn't add anything to fill the silence, because he'd learned that she used silence differently than most people did. She thought in it. She made decisions in it. Filling it was interference. "I want to see the contract before I sign anything," she said. Something moved in Roman's face. Not a smile, something that was in the territory, adjacent to relief, adjacent to something else, more complicated. "Of course. And I choose my own staff," I said that. "And if I determine that a patient needs a level of care this facility can't provide, and they need to go to a hospital, that decision is mine. Non-negotiable. No one overrides it." "Non-negotiable," he agreed. "And the 50,000. He blinked. She held his gaze. "You said you were going to offer 50,000. I'll take it. Not as a debt settlement, as a signing consideration." She held his gaze with the specific steadiness of a woman who had spent the night being underestimated and had stopped performing anything that wasn't exactly what she meant. "Because I earned it, and you know, I earned it, and I'm done doing things for free. It's in situations where other people are getting paid." Roman looked at her. Then he said, "Done." Nico made a sound that was mostly cough, and only partially the thing it actually was, which was satisfaction. The days that followed were not clean. Clean was not how things worked after a night like that one. And Alara understood this in the specific way. She understood most things practically, without sentimentality, with the recognition that understanding it didn't make it simpler. Forel spent 4 days in a secured location giving Dex everything the archive hadn't covered: the verbal communications, the meeting locations, the consortium contacts who operated below the documentation level. Roman's financial team used the archive to dismantle 3 of the consortium's primary funding channels within 72 hours. The 4th collapsed on its own when the handler whose name Forel had given them realized that the intercept had compromised his position and disappeared, which was a kind of confirmation. Marcus was handled differently than anyone expected, including Marcus. Roman put him in front of Nico first. Nico, 4 days post-surgery and still moving carefully, sat across from Marcus in the facility's small office and listened to the whole account: the approach, the fear, the 8 months of reports. The escalating sense of being trapped in something he hadn't understood was a trap when he'd agreed to it. Nico listened without interrupting. When Marcus was finished, Nico sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to give Dex a full account of every communication you sent and everything you observed in this facility. Every detail. You're going to do that today and tomorrow, and however many days it takes to make it complete. And when it's complete, you're going to be on a plane with enough money to start somewhere else. Because staying here isn't something any of us can make work after this." Marcus looked at him. "That's it? That's it," Nico said. Roman wanted different. I told him this was more useful. Marcus left 6 days later. Alara didn't see him go. She heard about it from Dex, who reported it with the neutrality of a person who had learned to operate in the space between what he thought should happen and what actually happened, and had made a private peace with the gap. Dex's own accounting came later: a conversation with Roman that Alara was not present for, and that Nico described to her afterward in the recovery room during one of the slow afternoons when he was well enough to talk, but not yet well enough to do much else. Roman told him that trust is not a thing you rebuild by apologizing for breaking it, Nico said. It's a thing you rebuild by being different, consistently, over time, until the evidence accumulates. He adjusted the pillow behind him with the careful movement of someone respecting their sutures. He gave Dex the chance to do that, which is more than most people would get. "Is that what Roman does?" Alara said. "Gives people the chance to be different?" Nico looked at her. "It's what he does with people he can't afford to lose." She let that sit. "How's the leg?" she said. "Better every day. Senna says another week I can start physical therapy." He looked at the ceiling. "I owe you a debt I have no currency for." "You don't owe me anything. You were my patient, Alara." "Nico, you were my patient. That's the beginning and end of it. It's not a debt." He looked at her. His eyes were clear and tired, and something that had the quality of a person who had been very close to not existing and had come back from that proximity, changed in ways he was still inventorying. "The drive," he said, "in my apartment. The evidence I was building against Forel. Roman has it now." "Yes. If I'd given it to him 6 weeks ago." "You made the decision you made with the information and judgment you had at the time," she said. "That's what everyone does. That's all anyone does." She checked his monitor reflex. Always reflex. The outcome would likely have been different. Different isn't the same as better. Forel was smarter than you gave him credit for. He might have run. You might have lost the evidence. There are versions of this where your caution was the right call. There are versions where it wasn't. Yes, and you'll carry both of those. She looked at him. That's not damage. That's just being the person who had to make the call. Nico was quiet for a moment. "You're very good at this." "At what?" "Telling people the true thing in a way that doesn't make it worse than it already is." He paused. "Skill. It's nursing," she said. "Same thing." The contract arrived on a Thursday. Roman's legal team had drafted it, a real legal team, not the kind that operated in the margins of things, but an actual firm that handled private medical facility contracts and whose partners asked no questions about the facility's particular patient population, because the facility's structure was clean enough that asking was unnecessary. Contract was 12 pages. It said what Roman had said it would say, in the precise language that made those things enforceable. She read all 12 pages. She sat in the facility's small kitchen with a cup of coffee that was better than the one she'd had the night of the attack. Someone had replaced the machine and bought decent beans, which she suspected was Roman, but had not confirmed. And she read every page and every clause, and she found 2 things she wanted changed, and she wrote them in the margin and sent the contract back. Both changes came back accepted within 4 hours. She signed it that evening. Roman wasn't there when she signed. He was in a meeting with the people who were handling the consortium's remaining network, a process that was ongoing and methodical, and that Dex updated her on periodically, not because she'd asked, but because Dex apparently decided that keeping her informed was part of his revised operational practice of telling people what they needed to know before they needed to know it. She appreciated it. She told him so. He nodded with the expression of a person receiving information and filing it under evidence. Roman came to the facility the following morning. He came in the way he'd come in that first morning direct, without announcement, the footsteps in the corridor that she knew now, moving through the space, with the economy of a person who understood exactly where he was going. He stopped in the doorway of the medical director's office, which had previously been the storage room and which she had converted in 2 days with the help of 2 of the facility's staff and a furniture delivery that nobody asked her to justify. He looked at the room, at the desk, which had the chart system open on the monitor, and a stack of supply requisitions that needed her review and a succulent in a small pot on the window ledge. Her succulent, retrieved from the torn plastic bag that had been sitting in the corner of the recovery room for a week. He looked at the succulent. "I had it in my locker for 3 years," she said. "It survived St. Jude's. It can survive this." He came in. He sat in the chair across from the desk, the chair that was for visitors, for patients, for people who needed to talk to the person behind the desk. He sat in it like a man who was learning to occupy that position. "Nico goes home tomorrow," he said. "I know. Senna cleared him this morning. I want him to come back in 10 days. For a follow-up, I'll have Dr. Reyes here for the vascular check." She made a note. "He needs to be horizontal more than he wants to be for the first week. He's going to resist that. He's going to resist it completely." "I know. Tell him." I said if I have to come to wherever he lives and make him lie down, I will. Something moved in Roman's face. The thing that was adjacent to a smile. "He'll believe that." "Good. Because it's true." She put the pen down. She looked at him across the desk. "The consortium. 3 of the 4 remaining nodes are inactive. The 4th is being managed." He said it with the directness that she'd come to understand was his version of transparency, not verbose, not elaborated, but accurate. Contractor is out of the field. His agreement holds as long as the consortium can't pay him, which is a function of the financial dismantling which is ongoing. So it's not finished. "These things don't finish cleanly," he said. "They become manageable. This is manageable." She looked at him. "Are you safe?" He met her eyes. "More than I was a week ago." "That's not an answer. It's the honest answer." He held her gaze. "I don't make promises I can't guarantee. You know that about me by now." She did know that. She'd learned it in the same way she'd learned everything about him, incrementally, under pressure, in the moments when he had no energy left for performance, and what she saw was simply the actual person. "Yes," she said. "I know that." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, the facility hummed. She could hear Senna in the recovery wing discussing something with the night nurse. She'd hired 3 days ago a woman named Petra who had 15 years of ICU's experience and who had, when Alara explained the nature of the position, said, "I've been looking for something exactly like this," with the directness of a person who meant it exactly. She could hear Nico's voice somewhere he was on the phone, talking to someone in the tone that meant he was managing something and enjoying managing it, which meant he was well enough to be himself, which was all she'd wanted, since the night she'd first put her hand on his wrist, in the back of a Suburban in the rain. She looked at Roman. He was looking at her, with the look he'd stopped trying to manage sometime in the past week, the look that she'd noticed and had decided to let be what it was, because she was too old and too tired and too honest to pretend she hadn't noticed it or that it wasn't the thing it was. "I want to show you something," he said. He took out his phone. He turned it toward her. On the screen was a document short, a single page, with a heading she read and then read again. It was the facility's official registration, the legal name, Margaret Quinn Medical Center. She looked at it for a long moment. She looked at him. "You said your mother's name," he said, "the night of the surgery. Nico told me what you said, that you'd tell someone her name. I thought this was worth doing." Her throat closed. She let it close. She sat with it, the way she'd been sitting, with everything that was too large to address. immediately practically, without sentimentality, giving it the space it required. You didn't ask me, she said. No, I should have. Do you want me to change it? She looked at the screen. Margaret Quinn. Her mother's handwriting had been terrible, and her cooking had been extraordinary, and she had spent 30 years as an LPN in a county hospital that nobody drove to unless they had no other choice, and she had treated every patient exactly the same, regardless of any other variable, and she had died 18 months ago of a fast and unfair cancer that Alara had sat beside for 6 weeks in a hospital room doing the things nurses did, which was everything that needed doing. No, Alara said. Don't change it. She handed the phone back. Roman took it. He held it for a moment, and then put it in his pocket and looked at the window, and then at the succulent, and then at her. The night I found you, he said, in the rain. Yes. You were carrying everything you owned in a bag that was tearing. Yes. You said you were staying because Nico was your patient, not because of the money, not because I'd given you a reason to. He paused. I believed you. I didn't understand it, but I believed it. He looked at his hands. I don't have many people in my life I believe immediately. She watched him. He was doing the thing she'd seen him do all week, speaking in the register below his usual register, the one that didn't have the control mechanism engaged. That was just the actual content without the architecture around it. I believe you too, she said. For what it's worth. He looked up. You said you'd handle the contractor, and you did. You said the contract would say what you said, and it did. You said Nico would be all right, and he's going home tomorrow. She held his gaze steadily. I'm a person who adjusts my assessment based on evidence. The evidence has been consistent. He was quiet for a moment. That's a very clinical way to say it. I'm a nurse. It's how I think. I know. He stood. He looked at the desk, the charts, the monitor, the succulent. He looked at the room that had been a storage space and was now, undeniably, someone's office. Dinner, he said. She blinked. What? Tonight. Not here. An actual restaurant, above ground, where people go who are not recovering from gunshot wounds or managing the dismantlement of criminal financial networks. He looked at her. If you want. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the rain, about the torn plastic bag and $238, and the sound of 5 black SUVs in the dark. Thought about Gerald Watts in the cardiac ICU at St. Jude's, alive, with no idea that the nurse who'd refused to let him die in a hallway had ended up somewhere like this. She thought about her mother's name on the wall of a building that was going to give people the care they couldn't get anywhere else, so Wisnor. I want, she said. Roman nodded. He moved toward the door. He stopped at the threshold, and she'd learned by now that he stopped at thresholds, that it was a habit, a hinge point, the moment where he made the last decision before moving from one space to another. Turned. For what it's worth, he said. The thing I didn't understand that night. About why you stayed. A pause. I understand it now. She looked at him. What do you understand? That some people carry their purpose the way other people carry weapons, he said, and that it's the more dangerous thing. He went. She sat at the desk that was her desk in the building that bore her mother's name, and she listened to the facility around her son's voice. Petra's voice. Nico laughing at something on the phone, and she pulled the top chart off the pile and uncapped her pen. Outside, Chicago was having a clear day for the first time in a week. She couldn't see it from here, but she could feel the quality of the light coming through the high window, the way it set differently on the walls than it had during the rain. She opened the chart. She started reading. She had work to do, and the work was hers. And that was the beginning, and the end of it, which was the same thing it had always been, and the same thing it was going to be from here. And enough. It was enough.